What if the plant they told you was dangerous was actually placed here to awaken you? What if every sacred cannabis ritual throughout history was hidden for one reason, because it makes you impossible to control? By the end of this revelation, you will understand why ancient priests guarded these cannabis rituals with their lives, and how you can access this forbidden knowledge tonight. Welcome, seeker of hidden truths. You are about to discover why the most powerful forces in history have spent centuries burying one simple fact: that sacred cannabis isn't just a plant. It's a key to dimensions of consciousness they never wanted you to find. Nesh, they painted the picture perfectly, didn't they? The lazy stoner, the clouded mind, the wasted potential. But what they never told you, what they couldn't tell you, is that every great civilization knew cannabis as something entirely different. Not an escape from reality, but a doorway into deeper reality. You've probably never questioned it. The way your body responds to cannabis, the softening of thought, the heightened awareness, the way time bends and colors shift. You might have called it a high, a buzz, a trip. But what if it's something else entirely? Something your body was designed to do. Nasti. Modern science has quietly confirmed what mystics have whispered for millennia. Your brain has a built-in system that responds exclusively to cannabis. Not alcohol, not caffeine, not any other substance, just this plant. These are cannabinoid receptors, tiny molecular gateways spread throughout your brain and nervous system. And they're not an evolutionary accident. They are precise, purposeful, like locks waiting for a sacred key. And cannabis is that key. Oh? Ask yourself this question and really sit with it. Why would the body be wired to receive something the earth grows so naturally, so abundantly? Why would your mind bloom under its influence in the exact same ways that ancient texts describe enlightenment, divine vision, ego death? The Vedas called cannabis Vijaya, the conqueror of suffering. In Egypt, it was the green messenger. In the Bible, hidden in plain sight, it was part of the holy anoil. These weren't metaphors. They were instructions, because this plant doesn't just alter perception, it removes the veil. But the world you were born into doesn't want veils removed. It prefers you comfortable, sedated, misinformed. No. So it told you cannabis was dangerous, useless, rebellious. It made stoners into jokes and sacred medicine into contraband. Not because the plant is weak, but because it's powerful. You weren't taught how to use it properly. Because if you were, you might start asking real questions about reality, about yourself, about what this world actually is, and why so many live asleep in it. You see, there's a reason ancient civilizations approached cannabis with reverence. They didn't use it to dull the mind. They used it to sharpen their inner vision. They prepared for it with prayer, breath, and stillness. They knew this plant was a spiritual amplifier, one that could elevate or unravel depending on the state you brought to it. Cannabis doesn't give you visions. It clears what blocks them. That's why this knowledge was buried, not destroyed, just hidden beneath centuries of ridicule and misinformation. Because if you knew what this plant could really do, if you approached it not as a drug, but as a guide, you'd become harder to manipulate. You'd start seeing through illusions. Societal, cultural, even emotional. You'd wake up, and waking up is dangerous to those who profit from your sleep. I see. Let me take you back to ancient Kemet, what we now call Egypt. Picture the sacred chambers beneath the Great Pyramid, the air thick with frankincense and myrrh. But there's something else burning, something that makes the hieroglyphs shimmer and dance in the flickering light. The priests around you aren't laughing or stumbling. Their eyes are clear, focused, burning with inner fire. They're not escaping consciousness. They're expanding it. Recent archaeological discoveries have shattered the mainstream narrative. At Tel Arad, in ancient Judah, researchers found something extraordinary. Cannabis residue on sacred altars, mixed with frankincense and other ceremonial compounds. This wasn't recreational use. This was ritual. This was ceremony. This was the sacred technology of consciousness expansion, being used exactly as the ancients intended. But here's what will blow your mind. They found these altars in the Holy of Holies, the most sacred space in the ancient temple. Cannabis wasn't being used by rebels or outcasts. It was being used by the high priests themselves. The evidence keeps mounting. In a Ptolemaic temple vessel discovered at Saqqara, scientists found traces of blue lotus, Syrian rue, and other psychoactive compounds. This wasn't just incense. This was a carefully crafted blend designed to alter consciousness in very specific ways. The priests knew exactly what they were doing. They understood the chemistry, the dosages, the combinations that would open doorways to higher perception. Syrian rue contains harmala alkaloids, natural MAO inhibitors that amplify and extend the effects of other compounds. Blue lotus contains aporphine and nuciferine, mild sedatives that create a dreamy, receptive state. When combined with cannabis and burned as incense, these plants don't just smell good. They create a psychoactive atmosphere that facilitates genuine mystical experience. This is what the CIA discovered during Project Stargate. Yes, the same intelligence agency that spent decades telling you cannabis was dangerous was secretly using it in their psychic espionage programs. During the Cold War, in a desperate race for psychic superiority, they launched classified operations to unlock untapped human potential. Remote viewing, telepathy, altered states, all investigated under the guise of national security. And within those dark corridors, cannabis found its way into the hands of participants. But it wasn't used recreationally. It was administered in low, precise doses, controlled, observed, documented, and shown. What they discovered defied everything they had been told to believe. Test subjects under the influence of cannabis began describing locations they'd never visited. Military bases, foreign offices, underground bunkers. Details that matched later reconnaissance photos. Sketches drawn while high eerily resembled structures in places they'd never seen. This wasn't imagination. It was perception turned inside out. Perception not bound by the five senses, but expanded, far, wide, deep. While psychedelics like LSD got the headlines, cannabis slipped quietly into these trials because of its unique profile. It didn't shatter the ego as violently. It didn't distort the mind beyond function. It enhanced intuition. It thinned the veil gently. And if the participant was trained, calm, and focused, they could stay tethered to their body while extending consciousness outward, like a kite floating beyond clouds, still anchored, still observing. Why was this never revealed? Because if you knew cannabis could expand awareness, not suppress it, you'd start asking the wrong questions. Questions that don't serve the system. Now to reach out. Nai. Me. One. Questions like, why was this plant made illegal in the first place? Why were its spiritual uses erased while alcohol and opiates were glamorized? Why were indigenous uses ignored, criminalized, then quietly appropriated behind closed government doors? You see, the real war on drugs wasn't a war on substances. It was a war on perception, on consciousness, on the tools that could help you step outside the machine and see its gears. And cannabis, when used ritually with sacred breath and focused mind, can do exactly that. Calm. Emdor and Tani. But not in the way most people expect. It doesn't give you visions like a psychedelic might. It tunes your awareness. It amplifies subtlety. You notice patterns you missed. You feel energy where you didn't before. You begin to sense the interconnectedness between your thoughts, your body, the space around you. And if you ask the right question, the plant responds. What am I not seeing? That single question, under the right conditions, has led people to break addictions, leave toxic relationships, uncover hidden trauma, even awaken long-dormant psychic faculties. Nine, die, MPT, source. Because cannabis doesn't hold answers. It creates space. Space where your deeper self, your higher knowing, your inner guide can finally be heard. And that terrified the agencies funding these programs. Because how do you control a population that can see through propaganda? That questions not just the media, but the metaphysics of reality itself. So the findings were buried, the documents redacted, the narratives flipped, and cannabis was pushed back underground. Not because it didn't work, but because it worked too well. Let me share something that will change how you see this plant forever. There's a reason Thoth didn't hand this ritual to just anyone. There's a reason ancient priests spent years in training before ever touching the green smoke. Because the plant is only half the key. The other half, the part that's almost always forgotten, is breath. Not just breathing, but intentional breath. Patterned, rhythmic, directed like a current through the nervous system. You see, cannabis interacts with the endocannabinoid system, yes, but that's just the gateway. What really changes your state is how energy flows once the plant is in your body. Ni, Dim Dao, and Thoth understood this. That's why his ritual wasn't just about smoking. It was about preparing the vessel, about unlocking a higher state by guiding energy through the spine, the lungs, the third eye. And for that, you need breath. We now know what the ancients sensed. Your breath controls your reality. Shallow breathing keeps you anxious, trapped in the mind. But deep, deliberate breath, it shifts you. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for peace, openness, inner stillness. Gaia. Add cannabis into that state, and something unusual happens. Not chaos, not confusion, but clarity. This is where the 7-breath activation begins. The ritual begins with silence. No lights, no distractions, just you, your breath, and the green messenger. You don't rush into the smoke. You don't light up casually, mind wandering, phone in hand. You approach it like a doorway, because that's what it is. Galgay, Dasimdao, Baimche. You sit in stillness, and you inhale deeply. Not the smoke, not yet, but air. You draw the breath in through the nose slowly, feeling it cool the nasal passages, expand the ribs, fill the belly. Then you hold, just for a second, long enough to notice the pause between input and release. And then you exhale slowly through the mouth, like fog rolling off a mountain. This breath pattern, slow inhale, brief hold, slow exhale, is done 7 times. Why 7? Because in the Egyptian spiritual system, 7 was the number of completion, of ascension. It aligns with the 7 energy centers, the 7 heavens, the 7 stages of alchemical transformation. Deo, Terai, Nikenliwa, say, bind. And with each breath, something happens. Your body slows, your mind stills, your senses sharpen. You become the observer, not just a thinker. Only then, only after the breath, do you introduce the plant. One slow draw, held not to the point of pain, but to the edge of stillness, then released with intention. And again, you sit. You let the wave pass through you, not controlling it, not clinging, just observing. Neshimu. What follows is not always dramatic. You might not see visions or feel lightning in your spine. Sometimes the most powerful thing cannabis does is reveal the silence underneath your thoughts, the space between, and in that space, something stirs, a memory, a knowing, a question you've been afraid to ask. This is where the eye of Horus begins to open, not because the plant is magical, but because your system has been primed to receive. You are no longer using cannabis to escape. You are using it to remember. No. And when you combine sacred breath with conscious use, you become the temple. Your body becomes the altar, the smoke, the incense, the breath, the chant. This is why Thoth's ritual worked and still works today, because it's not a recipe. It's a state, a way of approaching yourself and your consciousness with reverence instead of restlessness. Most people burn through the high looking for entertainment, but when you slow down, truly slow down and enter with intention, something changes. The plant meets you differently. Nine, afar, day, and daily. It doesn't flood you with distraction. It clears away what doesn't belong. And in that clarity, you see things you've long buried, not because they weren't there, but because you weren't ready. But readiness isn't about mastering the plant. It's about mastering the self. This ritual isn't complicated, but it demands sincerity, not performance, not perfection, just presence. It asks, will you show up for your own awakening, or will you keep treating the sacred like something casual? Because the truth is, The plant remembers, and it responds to the energy you bring. Bring haste, you'll get confusion. Bring stillness, and it will open you. But what happens when it opens more than you expect? What happens when visions become intense, or the veil gets thin? Why do some people see demons? And why, if that happens, it might be the most important lesson you'll ever receive. How? You've probably heard the stories. Someone tries cannabis for the first time, or maybe the 100th, and it hits different. The laughter fades. The music sounds strange. The room twists, and suddenly there's fear, panic, maybe even darkness. Some say they've seen things, felt watched, heard whispers. Not the giggles and munchies people joke about. Something deeper, something ancient. And they swear, I saw a demon. But what if that wasn't a bad trip? What if that was the point? The ancients never used cannabis casually. They fasted before rituals. They prayed. They purified. Not because they were superstitious, but because they understood something we've forgotten. The plant doesn't show you what you want. It shows you what you need. And sometimes what you need is to meet your shadow. Every mystical tradition in the world, from Tibetan Buddhism to Amazonian shamanism, agrees on one thing. The world you see under altered states is not random. It reflects your inner world, not always directly, not like a mirror, but like a dream, shaped by your deepest truths and fears. The Tibetan Book of the Dead calls it the Bardo, a place between death and rebirth, where your mind manifests your attachments, regrets, your desires and fears all at once. The Amazonian shamans say, the spirits you meet on ayahuasca are drawn to your frequency. They're not outside you. They're echoes of what's unresolved within. Cannabis, when used ritually, opens that same door. Just more quietly, more subtly. And if you're not ready, if you've buried pain, guilt, or truth, you might not see light. You might see everything you've avoided. Not because the plant is dark, but because you've turned away from the dark inside you. The demon isn't the enemy. It's the part of you that's been waiting to be seen. There's a reason some of the most profound spiritual initiations include confrontation with fear. Because fear, unexamined, controls you. Fear rules your choices, poisons your relationships, whispers limitations into your dreams. But fear, when faced, becomes a door. It transforms into insight, into power, into healing. And cannabis, if used consciously, can bring that fear to the surface. Not to punish you, but to free you. That's why intention matters. That's why space matters. And that's why preparation is everything. When ancient practitioners entered a ritual with cannabis, they didn't just set intentions. They created containers, protective fields, salt around the space, chanting to raise frequency, breathwork to stabilize the nervous system. Even the symbols carved into the walls served as anchors, reminders of divinity in moments when the mind spiraled. And it worked. And it worked. Even now, you can protect your experience. Ground yourself with salt. Across traditions, salt has been used as a purifier, a boundary between the physical and the astral. Use specific sounds, solfeggio frequencies or throat tone chants to stabilize your state. These aren't woo-woo tricks. They're ancient technologies, tools the ego dismisses, but the soul remembers. Bei, xiao. If fear comes, don't run. Don't suppress it. Ask it why it's there. Ask what it wants to show you. Because buried inside every bad trip is a truth your conscious mind hasn't been willing to face. And cannabis, unlike most psychedelics, lets you return gently. It doesn't throw you into chaos. It invites you in, and it gives you a choice to resist or to see. This is the sacred mirror, the moment when the high becomes holy, Nshi, when it's no longer about what you're feeling, but about what you're finally willing to feel. This is why ancient cultures didn't separate medicine from mysticism, because the healing was never just physical. It was spiritual. And cannabis, in its true form, was never a party drug. It was a truth teller. But to receive that truth, you have to listen. And to listen, you must be still enough to hear through the noise of your own mind. Nahan. Close your eyes for a moment and think about your last cannabis experience, or maybe your first. Now, ask yourself, what were you listening to? Was there music? Was there noise? Was there silence? Because whatever was vibrating in that space didn't just fill the air. It shaped your perception. It sculpted the high. Because cannabis doesn't just respond to your thoughts. It responds to sound. Me. Endings 4. You've probably felt this without understanding it. How one song can elevate the experience while another ruins it. How a certain frequency can make the high feel warm, euphoric, even visionary. Or how a sudden harsh noise can pull you into anxiety. That's not coincidence. That's resonance. And the ancients knew this better than anyone. In ancient Kemet, the high priests used sound the way alchemists use fire, not just to influence mood, but to transmute energy. They believed each organ, each energy center, each emotion had a corresponding frequency. And when they combined cannabis with tonal chanting, especially deep, repetitive, droning chants, they weren't just creating ambience. They were activating the body like an instrument. You've seen those hieroglyphs. Priests standing in symmetrical rows, arms raised, lips parted. Those weren't songs. They were codes. Intonations designed to vibrate the skull cavity, stimulate the vagus nerve, and harmonize the nervous system. Nyandu, Din, Adao, Nikurmai, O.D. This is what modern science now calls brainwave entrainment. Low, steady frequencies, especially in the 432 Hz to 528 Hz range, can slow the brain from beta thinking into alpha or theta, intuitive, trance-like states. And guess what? Cannabis accelerates this shift. Together, they don't just alter your mood, they rewire your perception. Take the Rastafarians, long mocked as just another stoner culture. But go deeper, and you'll see something much older at work. The chants, the drums, the call and response. They echo African spiritual traditions, Sufi zikrs, Vedic mantras. Each tone, each rhythm is intentional, not entertainment, ritual. The repetition of phrases like Ya Rastafari isn't just devotion, it's entrainment. The name repeated becomes a frequency, a tuning fork for consciousness. And under cannabis, that repetition becomes more than sound. It becomes structure, a way to ride the high instead of drown in it. Me. Most people don't realize this. They treat cannabis like a solo act. But in truth, it's a duet, with breath, with space, and especially with sound. That's why random playlists often lead to fragmented trips. That's why silence, when sacred, can be more powerful than any song. Because your mind under cannabis becomes porous. It absorbs everything. Every vibration becomes a suggestion. Every lyric, a spell. Every bass line, a pulse your nervous system begins to follow. Man, ekal, menin, etusko. So the question becomes, what frequencies are you letting into that space? Because if you want to use this plant the way Thoth did, not for escape, but for revelation, you must choose sound like you'd choose a guide. Carefully, intentionally, with respect. That could be Gregorian chants. It could be throat singing. It could be solfeggio tones pulsing in 432 H, designed to harmonize with the natural frequency of the earth. The key isn't the genre. It's the energy. Sound must support stillness, not distract from it. It must hold space, not fill it. Cannabis doesn't bring you visions. It reveals the ones already there. But to see them clearly, the space must be clean, internally and externally. And sound is one of the most powerful tools for cleaning that space, for stabilizing the journey, for guiding the mind where it's never dared go. That's why when the priests of Thoth lit the sacred incense and inhaled the green smoke, they didn't speak. They chanted. They hummed. They became instruments of vibration because they understood. Cannabis opens the door, but sound decides what walks through it. Most people think cannabis is harmless when used casually. A way to unwind, to relax, to laugh at things that don't matter. And for some, maybe it is. But that's only the surface. Beneath that haze of giggles and cravings lies something deeper, something ancient. And if you approach it the wrong way, the plant doesn't just become less effective. It becomes distorted. Cannabis is not neutral. It amplifies. It reflects. It reveals. And what it reveals depends entirely on how you enter the space. That's why ancient cultures didn't use it every day, in every mood, for any reason. They treated it like fire, capable of warming or burning depending on how it's handled. The mistake modern users make isn't just overuse. It's disrespect, not in a moral sense, but in a metaphysical one. You are inviting a spiritual technology into your body, into your mind, into your energy field, and doing so without intention is like opening a portal with no protection. This is why some people spiral into paranoia, apathy, or addiction, not because cannabis is evil, but because it was approached like a toy, not a tool. Imagine using a scalpel as a spoon. That's what happens when people smoke to numb, to distract, to avoid. Cannabis isn't here to erase pain. It's here to teach you through it. It doesn't make your problems go away. It makes you feel them differently, more clearly, until you see the patterns underneath. Eddie. And if you're not prepared to face those patterns, the high turns heavy. The ancients knew this. That's why before any ritual involving cannabis, there were preparations. Fasting, bathing, silence, not superstition, but purification. The shamans of South America cleanse their bodies before ceremony, not to look holy, but to clear energetic residue, to make the vessel clean enough to receive real insight. Thoth's priests did the same. They understood that the state of your body changes the state of your perception, that the plant doesn't work in isolation. It works through your vessel. And if your vessel is cluttered, agitated, fearful, or scattered, the experience will be too. But when you approach it with clarity, with purpose, something else happens. The smoke doesn't cloud your thoughts, it parts them. The high doesn't spiral, it ascends. The messages become clear. The body becomes light. The mind becomes still. And the vision becomes undeniable. Mine. And they. So ask yourself this. When you use cannabis, what energy are you bringing? Are you seeking truth or escape? Are you asking a question or trying to silence the ones already inside you? Because the plant will meet you exactly where you are, but it will always ask you to go further. Tonight, if you feel called, don't just light up. Sit down, breathe, ask the question aloud. What do I need to see? Then listen, not with your ears, but with your body. You may not get words. You may get images, feelings, a sense of something unfinished, asking to be resolved. That's the ritual beginning. That's the plant doing its true work, not as a drug, but as a guide. It's not about how much you smoke. It's about how deeply you listen. That's why in every tradition where cannabis was used as medicine for the soul, there were boundaries, not limitations, but containers. The temple, the circle, the chant, the fire. Now, because the power of the plant needs structure. Otherwise, it spills. And when sacred medicine spills, it becomes ordinary. It loses meaning. It becomes background noise in a life already too noisy. So the next time you reach for cannabis, stop and ask yourself, am I stepping into the temple? Or am I just lighting a fuse? The answer will shape everything that follows. 9. Before the leaf was criminalized, before the stoner jokes, the propaganda films, the war on drugs, before the police raids and prison sentences, cannabis had another name, sacrament. Not in one culture, not in one religion, but in almost every ancient tradition, spanning continents and centuries. It was never meant to be consumed mindlessly in alleyways or behind closed doors. It was burned in temples, infused in oils, brewed in sacred teas, not to numb the mind, but to awaken it. In ancient India, the Vedas, some of the oldest sacred texts known to humanity, called Cannabis Vijaya, meaning victory. It was known as one of Shiva's favorite herbs, used to conquer suffering and elevate consciousness. The Atharva Veda listed it among the 5 most sacred plants on earth, and it was often mixed with milk and spices to create a drink called Bang, consumed not for escape, but for union with the divine. There was no shame attached to it, only reverence. Nadolash, Palvi. Across the sea, the ancient Egyptians had their own rituals. Cannabis was ground into incense and burned in temples dedicated to Thoth, the god of wisdom, magic, and writing. He was said to have received divine visions, communicated with higher realms, and guided souls through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Temple carvings show priests holding strange flowering plants beside braziers, the smoke curling into sacred spaces where chants were sung and stars were studied. These weren't metaphors, they were instructions. Known? Wow. And then there's the Bible. Yes, the same holy book so often weaponized to demonize cannabis actually contains its hidden history. In Exodus 30:23, God instructs Moses to create a holy anointing oil using cannabis, a mysterious Hebrew term that scholars have now connected directly to cannabis. The oil is used to anoint priests, prophets, and kings to prepare the body as a vessel for the spirit. You weren't holy without it. You were activated by it. Niyarn, Awa, Mafei, Wine, Toni, Diru, Pandai. Somehow, all of that was erased. Centuries of colonization, cultural erasure, and institutional control rewrote the narrative. Cannabis was no longer sacred. It was sinful. The church, the state, the academy, all had a vested interest in making sure this plant's power was forgotten. Because if the masses knew, they could access insight, vision, and peace without hierarchy or permission, they'd stop looking outside themselves for authority. They'd go inward. And inward is the one place systems of control can't follow. What was once a global sacrament became a silent rebellion. And yet the wisdom never fully died. It hid in symbols, in stories, in underground rituals, passed quietly from seeker to seeker. And now it's resurfacing, not in labs, not in governments, but through people like you, curious, questioning, and ready to remember what you were never meant to forget. Because cannabis is not just a plant. It is a bridge between hemispheres of the brain, between dimensions of reality, between the self you were told to be and the one you truly are. Nun. And when used with reverence, it doesn't just alter your mind. It reintroduces you to your soul. But reverence requires more than knowledge. It requires embodiment, intention, the willingness to treat your own mind as sacred ground. As we reach the deeper mysteries of this journey, remember, what you've been told about cannabis is a story designed to limit you. But now that you've seen behind the curtain, you hold the pen. You get to write the next chapter. Me. Tonight, the veil is thin, not just metaphorically, but energetically. The ancients believed certain nights, especially those under specific lunar alignments, hold more charge, more openness. And when you pair that openness with intention, breath, and the right tool, something unlocks. That tool, for many of them, was cannabis, but not in the way most people imagine. This isn't about rolling a joint and scrolling through your phone. It's not about escaping reality. It's about entering it more fully. Tonight, if you choose, can be a portal. But like all portals, it requires a key. The key is presence, preparation, a willingness to see without distortion. This is the ritual that Thoth's temple initiates would have recognized, not in name, but in rhythm, in spirit, in stillness, a process of awakening that starts not in the smoke, but in the breath. The 7-breath activation isn't complicated, but it is powerful. With each breath, you're not just inhaling oxygen. You're signaling to your nervous system that something different is happening. That this moment is sacred. That this isn't about getting high. It's about getting aligned. Breathe in slowly through the nose. Hold, die. Exhale gently through the mouth. Again and again. 7 times. Let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts slow. With each breath, the chatter fades. The static clears. The body settles. Only then should you light the herb. Use less than you think you need. This is not about quantity, about direction. Now, Yomshar, think of the smoke as a messenger, a thread. Inhale it gently, and as the vapor enters, ask a question. Silently, sincerely. What do I need to see? Then exhale and listen. Not with your ears, with your entire being. At first, it may seem like nothing is happening. That's okay. Most people are so trained to chase stimulation that they miss the subtleties. But the plant doesn't shout. It whispers. It nudges. A feeling may arise, a memory, an image, a sudden realization you didn't expect. Let it come. Don't chase it. Just sit. Observe. Let the ritual unfold. Light a candle, if you have one. Dim the lights. Let darkness cradle you, not frighten you. Play soft tones, vibrational music, ancient chants, even silence. Sound matters. It anchors the journey. It holds the container. The ancients understood that frequency is not decoration. It's navigation. Now, Epimu, Efi, Andagano, and Kelfsalsa be sure. And cannabis, when paired with the right tones, can take you deeper than smoke alone ever could. You might cry. You might laugh. You might feel like you've entered a dream within a dream. Let it be what it is. Don't try to shape it. The ritual doesn't respond to control. It responds to surrender. And when it's done, when the visions fade and the breath returns, sit a little longer. Journal. Stretch. Thank the plant out loud. Novnia. Nei. Joel. This simple act seals the space. It reminds your psyche that what just happened was real, valuable, sacred. Because without reverence, all rituals become routines. But with reverence, even the smallest act becomes a doorway. What you saw, felt, remembered, or realized tonight wasn't just random. It was meant for you. Not as entertainment, not as escape, but as a key to a deeper version of you that's been waiting patiently to be remembered. The cannabis plant didn't put that wisdom there. It helped you uncover what was already inside. And that's the point. This ritual isn't about the plant. It's about your awakening. Cannabis is just one path, one tool. But when used with humility, precision, and intention, it becomes a mirror to the soul. And once you see clearly, you can't unsee. The world doesn't change, but how you walk through it does. Anarfai. Communicates. If you never touch the plant again, Let this night be the one that reminded you of your power to choose, to see, to shift. And if you do continue walking with the green messenger, let it always be with care, with breath, with a question, because that's what keeps the ritual alive. The sacred cannabis ritual of Thoth isn't just ancient history. It's available right now, in this moment, if you have the courage to step through the doorway. And because the plant remembers everything. It remembers the reverence of temple priests and the casualness of recreational users. It remembers your intentions, your fears, your readiness to face truth, and it responds accordingly. Bring chaos, receive chaos. Bring stillness, receive revelation. The question isn't whether cannabis is sacred. The question is whether you are ready to treat it as sacred, whether you're willing to set aside casual consumption and approach it as the spiritual technology it has always been. Nay. But here's what most people don't understand about ritual cannabis use. It's not just about the ceremony itself. It's about the integration. Because what happens in that sacred space, the insights, the visions, the emotional releases, they don't end when the smoke clears. When they begin there. The ancient Egyptians understood this better than anyone. They called it the awakening of the Ba. Your Ba is your soul's essence, the part of you that exists beyond physical form. And cannabis, when used ritually, doesn't just alter your consciousness temporarily. It awakens dormant aspects of your Ba that have been sleeping under layers of conditioning and fear. Think about the last time you had a truly profound cannabis experience. Not the giggles, not the munchies, but that moment when something deep inside you stirred, when you felt connected to something larger than yourself, when insights flowed like water and you saw patterns in your life with crystal clarity. That wasn't the drug talking. That was your Ba awakening. That was your true self remembering what it came here to do. But here's where most people go wrong. They have that experience, that moment of clarity, and then they return to their ordinary life unchanged. They treat it like a peak experience, a nice memory, something to chase again next time. They miss the real point entirely. The ritual isn't meant to be an escape from your life. It's meant to transform your life. Every insight received, every fear faced, every truth glimpsed, these are instructions, marching orders from your higher self about what needs to change, what needs to heal, what needs to be released. 9. The priests of knew this. That's why their cannabis rituals were always followed by periods of contemplation, journaling, integration practices. They understood that the plant doesn't just show you things randomly. It shows you exactly what you're ready to work with, exactly what your soul is calling you to address. And if you ignore those messages, if you treat them as mere hallucinations or drug-induced fantasies, the plant will stop speaking to you clearly. It will become muddy, confusing, even frightening, because you're not honoring the sacred contract you made when you asked to see. This is why cannabis becomes problematic for so many people, not because the plant is inherently harmful, but because they're using it backwards. They're seeking escape when the plant wants to bring them home. They're avoiding responsibility when cannabis is calling them to take full ownership of their spiritual evolution. You see, every time you consume cannabis, whether you realize it or not, you're entering into a relationship with an intelligence far older and wiser than your conscious mind. This plant has been observing human consciousness for millennia. It has watched empires rise and fall, witnessed the birth and death of countless spiritual traditions, absorbed the prayers and tears and revelations of millions of seekers. And it remembers all of it. Every ritual, every ceremony, every moment of genuine connection between human and plant consciousness. When you approach cannabis with reverence, you're not just getting high. You're plugging into an ancient network of wisdom that spans cultures and centuries. This is what the shamans call the plant teacher network. Each plant medicine, whether it's cannabis, ayahuasca, psilocybin, or others, carries within it the accumulated wisdom of all its previous interactions with human consciousness. They learn from us, and we learn from them. It's a symbiotic relationship that most people never even recognize. Newton. But the cannabis ritual of Thoth takes this relationship to an entirely different level. Because Thoth wasn't just any deity. He was the keeper of divine knowledge, the one who recorded the deeds of the dead and weighed their hearts against the feather of truth. He was the bridge between the human and divine realms, the translator of cosmic mysteries into forms the human mind could grasp. When you invoke Thoth in your cannabis ritual, you're not just asking for personal insights. You're requesting access to the Akashic records themselves, the cosmic library where all knowledge and wisdom is stored. The ancient texts describe Thoth as having the head of an ibis, a bird sacred to the Egyptians because of its ability to navigate between air and water, between the physical and spiritual realms. The ibis can walk on land, swim in water, and soar through air. It's a creature of all elements, just as consciousness itself moves fluidly between different states of being. This is why the sacred cannabis ritual was performed with such precision. The priests understood that they were opening doorways between dimensions of reality. They weren't just getting stoned for fun. They were conducting advanced consciousness research, exploring the far reaches of human potential. And what they discovered would shock most people today. They found that cannabis doesn't just alter brain chemistry. It actually tunes the human nervous system to receive transmissions from higher dimensional frequencies. Modern science is just beginning to catch up to what these ancient practitioners knew thousands of years ago. Recent research into the endocannabinoid system has revealed something extraordinary. Your body produces its own cannabinoids, naturally occurring compounds that are identical to those found in cannabis. These endocannabinoids regulate everything from mood to memory, from appetite to pain perception. But here's what the researchers aren't telling you. Now, these endocannabinoid receptors aren't just scattered randomly throughout your body. They're concentrated in very specific areas. The highest concentrations are found in the pineal gland, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex, the same brain regions associated with mystical experiences, psychic abilities, and higher states of consciousness. It's as if your body was designed from the beginning to interface with cannabis consciousness, as if this plant was placed here specifically to help human beings remember their divine nature and reclaim their spiritual sovereignty. This is why governments around the world have worked so hard to suppress cannabis use, not because it's dangerous to your health, but because it's dangerous to systems of control that depend on keeping you disconnected from your higher self. Cannabis doesn't just make you question authority, it makes you realize you are the authority in your own spiritual life. When you combine this understanding with the ritual practices of ancient Egypt, something extraordinary happens. You don't just consume cannabis. You commune with it. You enter into conscious dialogue with an intelligence that has been waiting patiently for you to remember the conversation you've been having for lifetimes. Tune. The Syrian rue that archaeologists found mixed with cannabis in those ancient temple vessels wasn't just a random addition. Syrian rue contains harmala alkaloids that act as MAO inhibitors, compounds that prevent the breakdown of certain neurotransmitters in your brain. When you combine Syrian rue with cannabis, you're essentially extending and amplifying the experience, allowing for deeper states of consciousness that can last for hours instead of minutes. The blue lotus petals found in the same vessels contain compounds that promote relaxation and lucid dreaming. Together, these plants create a synergistic effect that the ancient Egyptians called the divine intoxication, a state of consciousness where the veil between worlds becomes permeable and communication with non-physical beings becomes possible. Manin, now, Timoa, Gadiku, Editi, Nivshabodsker, Ebskranai, Adnab. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't about recreational drug use. This is about spiritual technology that requires the same level of respect and preparation you would bring to any sacred practice. The ancient priests didn't just walk into the temple and start smoking. They prepared for days, sometimes weeks, purifying their bodies and minds through fasting, meditation, and prayer. They understood that the quality of your consciousness determines the quality of your experience. If you approach the plant in a scattered, anxious, or frivolous state of mind, that's exactly what you'll receive back amplified. But if you come with genuine reverence, clear intention, and an open heart, the plant will meet you at that level and take you even higher. This is why the 7-breath activation is so crucial to the ritual. Those 7 breaths aren't just a way to relax. They're a way to attune your nervous system to receive higher frequencies of information. Each breath is like tuning a radio dial, clearing static and finding the precise frequency where transmission becomes possible. The number 7 itself holds deep significance in Egyptian mysticism. 7 chakras, 7 heavens, 7 levels of consciousness, 7 alchemical transformations. When you breathe in the pattern of 7, you're aligning yourself with cosmic rhythms that have governed spiritual evolution since the beginning of time. Na'atem, Mihal. Ancient texts describe the process in detail. The initiate would enter the inner sanctuary at the moment when Venus was rising, carrying a small brazier filled with the sacred mixture. The chamber would be completely dark except for a single flame, and the walls would be covered with hieroglyphs that seemed to come alive in the dancing shadows. As the sacred smoke filled the space, the initiate would begin to chant specific vowel sounds, tones that were believed to activate dormant energy centers in the body. These weren't random sounds. They were precise vibrational frequencies designed to harmonize the human energy field with the cosmic frequencies being channeled through the plant. What happened next was always different for each person, but the overall pattern was remarkably consistent. First would come a profound sense of peace and expanded awareness. Time would slow down or seem to stop altogether. Then the hieroglyphs on the walls would begin to shimmer and move, revealing hidden meanings and secret messages. The initiate would often report seeing Thoth himself not as a distant deity, but as a living presence offering direct instruction. Sometimes he would appear with the head of an ibis, sometimes in fully human form, and sometimes as pure light or geometric patterns that conveyed information without words. But the most profound part of the experience wasn't the visions themselves. It was the download of knowledge that would continue for days or even weeks afterward. Initiates would find themselves suddenly understanding complex mathematical principles, architectural techniques, or healing methods they had never studied. It was as if the ritual had activated dormant areas of their consciousness that contained knowledge from previous lifetimes or higher dimensional sources. This is what modern researchers are calling downloaded information, sudden access to knowledge or abilities that seem to come from outside normal learning processes. And it's happening more and more frequently to people who are approaching cannabis with the right combination of respect, preparation, and clear intention. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. The ritual doesn't end when the smoke clears and the visions fade. That's actually when the real work begins. Because everything you received during the sacred cannabis ritual, every insight, every vision, every download of information comes with a responsibility to integrate it into your daily life. The ancient Egyptians understood this perfectly. They called it walking in Ma'at, living in harmony with the divine order revealed through the ritual. It meant taking the wisdom you received and using it to serve not just your own evolution, but the evolution of all consciousness. This is why so many people struggle with cannabis today. They want the insights without the responsibility. They want the expanded awareness without the commitment to transform their lives based on what they've learned. They want to be spiritual tourists instead of spiritual warriors. But the plant doesn't work that way. Cannabis consciousness has infinite patience, but it also has standards. If you repeatedly ignore the guidance you receive, if you treat sacred insights as mere entertainment, the plant will gradually withdraw its deeper teachings. You'll still get high, but you'll lose access to the profound transformative potential that cannabis offers to those who approach it with genuine reverence. The Syrian rue and blue lotus weren't the only plants the ancient Egyptians combined with cannabis. Archaeological evidence shows they also used frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and other aromatic herbs to create complex blends designed for specific purposes. Some blends were used for healing, others for divination, others for communication with the deceased. Each combination created a different type of consciousness shift, like having access to multiple channels on a cosmic radio. The priests became master pharmacologists, understanding exactly how different plants work together to produce precise states of awareness. Modern research is just beginning to understand what these ancient practitioners knew intuitively. Different cannabinoids and terpenes in cannabis produce different effects, not just on mood and perception, but on the specific types of information you can access while in altered states. Some strains enhance creativity and artistic inspiration. Others deepen meditative states or facilitate emotional healing. Still others seem to open pathways to psychic abilities or mystical experiences. The key is learning to work with these different frequencies of cannabis consciousness in a purposeful, sacred way rather than just consuming whatever happens to be available and hoping for the best. This brings us to one of the most important aspects of the Thoth cannabis ritual that's been almost completely lost in modern times. The concept of set and setting, but taken to a much deeper level than most people understand. Set refers to your mental and emotional state, your intentions and expectation. Setting refers to your physical environment and the people you're with. But in the ancient Egyptian context, set and setting included spiritual protection, energetic boundaries, and conscious invocation of beneficial forces. They understood that when you open your consciousness through cannabis, you're not just changing your brain chemistry. You're making yourself permeable to influences from other dimensions of reality. Now, this is why they always perform the ritual within sacred geometric structures, surrounded by protective symbols and invocations. They knew that expanded consciousness is like having all your windows and doors open. Wonderful energies can flow in, but so can unwanted influences if you're not properly protected. This is also why they never performed cannabis rituals alone. There was always at least one other person present who remained completely sober, serving as a guardian and guide for the one undergoing the experience. This person was trained to recognize the signs of both beneficial and potentially harmful spiritual contacts, and knew how to intervene if necessary. Now, the role of the sober guardian was considered just as sacred as that of the person consuming the plant. They were trained in energy work, protective prayers, and crisis intervention. They understood that their consciousness and intentions directly affected the quality and safety of the ritual experience. In modern terms, we might call this harm reduction, but the ancient approach went far beyond just preventing physical problems. They were protecting the psychic and spiritual well-being of the participant, ensuring that only beneficial teachings and experiences could occur within the sacred space. 9. One of the most fascinating aspects of the archaeological record is the discovery of detailed written accounts of these rituals, recorded by scribes who interviewed participants afterward. These accounts reveal a consistent pattern of experiences that challenges everything we think we know about the nature of consciousness and reality. Participants routinely reported traveling to other locations, both on Earth and in other dimensions. They described conversations with beings of light who provided detailed information about healing, mathematics, astronomy, and spiritual development. They reported receiving prophecies about future events, many of which were later verified as accurate. But perhaps most remarkably, they reported a direct, undeniable knowing that consciousness exists independently of the physical brain, that the mind is not produced by the brain, but rather uses the brain as a kind of receiving station for information from higher dimensional sources. This understanding formed the foundation of all Egyptian spiritual practice. They knew that death was not the end of consciousness, but simply a transition from one state of being to another. This knowledge allowed them to approach both life and death with a fearlessness and wisdom that modern humanity has largely forgotten. The cannabis rituals were one of the primary ways they accessed this larger perspective on existence. Through the plant, they could experientially verify the truths that their spiritual teachings described. They could travel beyond the physical body and directly perceive the multidimensional nature of reality. This is why cannabis was never used casually in ancient Egypt. It was considered a sacred tool for consciousness research, reserved for trained priests and initiates who had demonstrated the maturity and wisdom necessary to handle such profound experiences responsibly. The 7-breath activation that we discussed earlier was just the beginning of a much more complex ritual process. After the initial breathing technique, participants would enter into what they called the silence, a state of complete mental stillness where even internal dialogue ceased. This wasn't just relaxation or meditation as we typically understand it. It was a complete suspension of ordinary mental activity, creating a clear channel for non-ordinary information to flow through. The ancient texts describe it as becoming an empty vessel, ready to be filled with divine wisdom. Only when this state of absolute receptivity was achieved would the participant inhale the sacred smoke. But even then, it wasn't a matter of just taking a hit and waiting for something to happen. The inhalation itself was performed with precise technique, drawing the smoke deep into the lungs while simultaneously directing energy up the spine to the crown of the head. The exhale was equally important, released slowly, while visualizing the smoke carrying away all mental and emotional impurities, leaving consciousness pure and clear. This process would be repeated 3 times, with periods of silent observation between each inhalation. Now, Peleautor, Bamil Warshi, Nari, Damned. What happened next varied depending on the specific intention set before the ritual. Some sessions were focused on healing, others on divination or communication with deceased loved ones. Still others were purely exploratory, seeking to map the far reaches of consciousness and bring back knowledge that could benefit humanity. But regardless of the specific focus, all sessions followed the same basic protocol. After the 3 sacred inhalations, participants would lie on a specially prepared mat, surrounded by protective symbols and covered with a blanket that had been blessed by the temple priests. They would then enter what modern researchers call a controlled out-of-body experience, consciously separating their awareness from their physical form, while remaining connected by a silver cord that allowed them to return safely. This wasn't a loss of consciousness or an uncontrolled trip. It was a deliberate, skillful navigation of non-physical dimensions of reality. The sober guardian would remain present throughout this process, monitoring the participant's breathing and energy field, ready to provide guidance or bring them back if any problems arose. The entire experience typically lasted between 3 and 6 hours, followed by a period of rest and integration that could extend for several days. During this integration period, participants were encouraged to record their experiences in detail, often creating elaborate artwork or written accounts that captured the essence of what they had learned. These records were preserved in the temple archives, creating a vast library of consciousness exploration that documented thousands of years of systematic spiritual research. Modern scholars who have studied these archives are amazed by their sophistication and consistency. The experiences described are remarkably similar to those reported by contemporary researchers using similar techniques, suggesting that these ancient practitioners had discovered universal principles of consciousness that transcend time and culture. But here's what the scholars don't understand, what they can't understand without direct experience. These weren't just interesting psychological phenomena or curious historical artifacts. They were accurate maps of non-physical reality, precise descriptions of how consciousness actually works when freed from the limitations of ordinary waking awareness. The ancient Egyptians weren't primitive people, creating fantasies to explain natural phenomena they didn't understand. They were advanced consciousness researchers, conducting systematic investigations into the deepest mysteries of existence. And cannabis was one of their primary research tools. This is why the modern suppression of cannabis is so tragic. We haven't just lost access to a useful medicine or recreational substance. We've lost access to one of humanity's most important tools for consciousness research and spiritual development. We've cut ourselves off from thousands of years of accumulated wisdom about the nature of reality and our place within it. But that doesn't mean this knowledge is gone forever. The plant teachers are patient. They wait for each generation to rediscover what previous generations knew. And now, as attitudes toward cannabis continue to shift and prohibition begins to crumble, we have an unprecedented opportunity to reclaim this ancient wisdom and apply it to our modern challenges. The question is, are you ready to be part of this renaissance of consciousness? Are you prepared to approach cannabis not as a drug to be consumed, but as a teacher to be honored? Are you willing to do the preparation work, to create sacred space, to receive the teachings with humility and integrate them with integrity? Because make no mistake, the plant is watching. Cannabis consciousness is evaluating every person who approaches it, determining whether they're ready for deeper teachings or whether they need to remain at surface levels until they develop greater wisdom and maturity. This isn't about judgment or exclusivity. It's about protection, both for the plant and for the human, because the deeper levels of cannabis consciousness contain power that can transform lives and civilizations. In the wrong hands, or approached with the wrong intentions, that same power can create confusion, addiction, and spiritual bypassing. The ancient Egyptians understood this perfectly. That's why their cannabis rituals were surrounded by so many safeguards and protocols. They weren't being uptight or controlling. They were being responsible guardians of sacred knowledge that could either liberate or destroy depending on how it was used. So if you're feeling called to explore the sacred cannabis ritual of Thoth, begin slowly and with deep respect. Start by studying your own relationship with the plant. Notice how you currently use it, what intentions you bring to it, what kind of container you create around your experiences. Ask yourself honestly, am I approaching cannabis as a sacred teacher or as a recreational drug? Am I creating space for transformation or just seeking temporary escape? Am I willing to receive difficult truths about myself and my life? Or do I only want pleasant experiences that confirm what I already believe? These are the questions that determine whether you're ready for deeper work with plant consciousness. Because the cannabis ritual of Thoth isn't about having interesting experiences or impressive visions. It's about fundamental transformation of who you are and how you show up in the world. It's about remembering your divine nature and claiming your birthright as a conscious co-creator of reality. It's about healing the artificial separation between matter and spirit, between human and divine, between individual consciousness and cosmic consciousness. And it's about taking responsibility for your role in the great awakening that's happening on this planet right now. Because We're living in times remarkably similar to ancient Egypt, times when old structures are crumbling and new possibilities are emerging, times when consciousness itself is evolving, and those who are prepared can help guide that evolution in positive direction. The sacred cannabis ritual of Thoth isn't just ancient history. It's a blueprint for the future, a technology for consciousness evolution that's needed now more than ever. The plant teachers have been waiting for this moment, preparing for a time when humanity would be ready to reclaim its spiritual heritage and step into its full potential. That time is now. The question is whether you'll be one of those who answers the call, who steps forward to reclaim this ancient wisdom and apply it to healing yourself, your community, and your world. The green messenger is waiting. The ancient wisdom is calling, and your true self is ready to be remembered. Are you ready to reclaim what was stolen from you? Are you ready to remember what you never truly forgot? The forbidden cannabis ritual of Thoth isn't just about getting high. It's about getting home. Home to your true nature. Home to your divine purpose. Home to the cosmic consciousness that you've always been but temporarily forgot. What will you choose?